eufyMake just made textured printing way more customizable. So today, we're testing 3 ways to create depth maps, from beginner-friendly to fully custom. Let's see which one gives us the best final print. For the printer setup, we're keeping things super easy. We're swapping out the mini bed for the standard bed, then adding a matte white acrylic sheet that we cut on our laser. Now we've got a clean, full-size surface ready to print on. We're starting with the basics. So let's say you just unboxed your eufyMake E1, and the first thing you want to try is a textured print or engraving style effect. This is exactly where you start. After creating a snapshot of our bed and importing our image, we can head over to the right side of eufyMake Studio and select Relief Texture. From here, eufyMake Studio does most of the heavy lifting for us. It analyzes the image, creates a depth map, and automatically turns the design into a raised texture. Now all we need to do is choose how tall we want that texture to be. For this one, we're going with the 2.5mm option. Once that's selected, we hit Print and let the E1 do its thing. While that's printing, let's move on to our next option. This one is for the intermediate user who wants a little more control over the final result. Now, let's step it up a notch. If you want a little more control over the final texture, the eufyMake team has you covered. Using the same image that we applied the relief texture to, we now have a new option that lets us edit the depth map directly. And if you're unfamiliar with how a depth map works, here's the quick version. Black represents the lowest point of the image, and pure white represents the tallest point, based on whatever height setting you choose. So if we set our texture height to 2.5mm, the white areas will raise up to that full height. Everything in between, like the shades of gray, creates all those different levels of depth. This is where eufyMake Studio gives you more control. You can tweak the depth map settings to adjust how high or low certain parts of the design appear. You also get brush tools like Dodge and Burn. Dodge lets you brighten areas, which raises them up, and Burn darkens areas, which lowers them down. There's also a Flatten tool, which basically blacks out part of the depth map and drops that section down to the lowest point. This is really helpful when the auto-generated depth map creates texture where you might not actually want it. For example, smaller details like text can sometimes become harder to read once texture is added. It can also create a rougher surface over letters or tiny details, which might not be the look you're going for. So for this design, we flattened any of the objects that had words on them. That keeps those areas nice and clean while still letting the rest of the design keep that raised texture effect. Once we were happy with the edits, we sent it over to the printer. And while that one prints, we can move on to the next version, where we take even more control over the final result. At this point, there are really 2 main issues we want to fix. First, when you raise smaller details too high, they can end up creating a rough texture, or even become a little fragile. And second, with an image like this, not every part of the design should actually have texture. For example, in this photo, the image itself really shouldn't be raised and textured in the same way as the other elements. So, what we want to do is flatten the text, keep certain areas smooth, and still allow the element underneath to stay raised. To do that, we're stepping outside of eufyMake Studio and into a more advanced image editing program. There are also services online that let you generate and download a depth map, and once you bring that into your image editor, you get a lot more control over the final result. This is where things get really fun. We can use spot healing to clean up little imperfections and remove tiny details completely. We can use the color picker and brush tool to paint over text or other areas that we want to smooth out. We can even use AI tools to remove elements if needed. But one of our favorite methods is using simple shapes to create perfectly flat, solid surfaces. That gives us a much cleaner and more controlled result. And remember, different shades of gray create different levels of height. So by controlling those shades directly, we're also controlling the shape, smoothness, and overall evenness of the final print. After making those edits, we're left with a much cleaner depth map that feels completely custom. And that also means we can push the print height even further. Once we import that updated depth map back into eufyMake's Studio, the difference is immediately noticeable. The depth looks much more realistic, the surfaces look cleaner, and now we can safely raise the height all the way to 4 millimeters without creating areas that are overly rough or super fragile. So if you want the most polished and customized result, this is definitely the way to go. All three of our prints are done, so now it's time to take a closer look. Starting with the beginner option, this is the standard relief texture. And honestly, we have to hand it to eufyMake. The convenience of clicking one button and generating a textured print like this is pretty awesome. You don't need any image editing skills, you don't need to create a custom depth map, and you can still end up with a really cool looking design. The main thing we notice is that the texture gets applied to everything, the smaller details, and even areas we may have wanted to keep flat. So now, let's see how this compares to the version we edited directly inside eufyMake's Studio. Now with this version, we still get that same great raised effect on our graduate and the accessories, but the big difference is control. The text is much easier to read, and the Polaroid-style image is now nice and flat instead of having texture applied across the whole thing. So this new depth map editing feature is a really nice step forward for eufyMake's Studio. It gives users a much better way to create the exact look they're going for without needing to jump into another program. You can brighten areas, darken areas, flatten details, and clean up the parts that don't need texture. It definitely gives us more control than the standard relief texture option. And having those tools built directly into eufyMake's Studio makes the whole process super convenient. That leaves us with the best for last, in our opinion, of course. This is the fully custom depth map version, and this is where we feel like we get that slight advantage when trying to create the perfect print. It gives us the best parts of both previous versions. The text is much easier to read, the Polaroid image stays nice and flat, but we still keep the raised height on the accessories underneath. That's the big difference here. Instead of flattening the entire object just because it has text on it, we were able to control exactly what stayed flat and what remained raised. So the words are cleaner, the surfaces are smoother, and the overall design feels more intentional. Removing those small unwanted details from the depth map also allowed us to push the print height even further. This final version is almost double the height of the first print, but because the depth map is cleaner, it doesn't feel overly rough or fragile. And that's what makes this one stand out for us. The beginner version is incredibly easy. The built-in editor gives you more control, but the custom depth map gives you the most polished final result. We think this one is our favorite, but let us know what you think down in the comments. And start your comment with the word depth so we know you watched all the way to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and stay creative.